Hello, my new Photoshop learners. Today we're going to talk about alpha channels, and this is kind of a fun concept because it's used all across the spectrum. If you take motion graphics, you'll use alpha channels, or any sort of video editing. Alpha channels are involved. They're basically just masking channels. Oftentimes a black and white channel, we have a mask associated with it. And then sometimes in motion graphics and video, you move that mask along. We won't get that advanced in Photoshop, but this will be a nice primer to what's coming later. And just so you know, you've already used an alpha channel. I've mentioned this before. It was for one of your homework assignments. So let me just show you what we're working with today. This image that I used to use for a demo, sometimes still do, of Quinn when he was younger. And it has this background element. And I blurred out this background using Gaussian Blur filter. But I needed to do it selectively because I wanted it to look like actual depth of field, where the camera's focused on the foreground image, which was Quinn, and it got progressively blurry in the background. Let me turn the crane off here for a minute. So, the whole idea being that's how lenses work, whether it's the lens in your eyeball or if it's a lens in a camera. There's a line of sharp focus, and then it falls off in the foreground and background depending on your depth of field. So this is a great thing visually because no one wants trees growing out of their head, so I don't want these two big pine trees growing out of Quinn's head. I mean, if we separate them through space, that doesn't appear to be happening. So blurring them out actually lets us focus more on our central subject, so this is a great thing visually. The scratch layer here is, you probably guessed it from our blending mode last time, using a blending mode. Otherwise it would look like this. It is literally a piece of black paper that I scratched in lines with an X-Acto knife, and then by overlaying this on screen mode, Lighten would work too, but screen worked best. And in fact, I'm going to drop it behind Quinn just so there's no scratches on him. It gives me kind of a textured old look that I also supplemented with these adjustment layers, a black and white adjustment layer, and then on top of it, this photo filter. It's a warming filter that is also one of the adjustment layers under the little cookie icon. Okay. Also, I neglected so far to tell you what a layer set is, I think. So just review the layer group or layer set. These folders are layer groups. So if I click on like two items, I can shift click them, and I can come up here to this little menu, and I can say, hey, new group from layers, and call this my text and titles layer or something. And I can work on the layers still independently, or I can work on them individually. So cool, that's a layer group. All right, we need that layer group for the first part of this demo. We're going to take this text, and I'm actually going to rasterize it because I need it to be pixels, and it's actually vector-based when we first start it. So I'm going to rasterize this type layer under type, rasterize type. And that just means I can't edit it anymore as I would normal type. It's actually just pixels, so I can edit it like pixels. But what I want to do before I start this alpha channels thing is show you the gradient tool. We haven't used it yet. And the way this works is, you mix up a foreground and background color. So we're going to go to this first icon. In fact, you know what? I like to look at this small thumbnails just so I can see a lot of the oopsies. I already just put it down. If you roll over it with your mouse, it should tell me what they are. Why is it not doing that? Come on, guys. Here, up there. I'm just not being patient enough. Foreground to background. This is one we want. Black to white. If we're doing just straight masking, we're going to pick foreground to background for this part right here, which means I can mix up the foreground to background color. Like, let's start with something like let's do it's nice and cool today. Feels like fall all of a sudden. So we're going to pick some fall colors. I will pick an orange, and then we'll pick more of a reddish brown color. we have a foreground and background color, orange and dark brown. And let me undo what we did before by mistake. I dropped that alpha. So if I was to draw a gradient, it would look something like that. Now if I just want like the gradient in the text, which is what I wanted to show you, what I can do with these layers is there's a bunch of icons I can use up here. Like I can lock a layer and then nothing will happen. It'll tell me it's locked. I can move a layer around. I can paint on, I can lock the image pixels, so it would only paint on the actual image pixels. Or in this case, I can also lock the transparency. And what that means, if I lock the transparency, is if I go to paint something, it will only paint on those pixels. Let me get a bigger brush so that's more clear. So I could go, wee, draw a line through there. I don't need to make a selection or anything crazy, especially with like this type here. Okay, undo, undo. So with the gradient tool, I'm going to keep that locked, and so we can just put a gradient within the word alpha channels, and I'll even blow it up. Oopsie. I'll even blow it up a little bit more. I hit the wrong keyboard command there. Okay, gradient tool. We're going to do a linear gradient, which is the first one. I've already done foreground to background color. And then all you do with this tool is you just click and drag. And the shorter you drag, the tighter the gradient, the quicker it goes from one color to the next. So the longer I drag it, if I wanted the whole gradient to go through both words, start way down here, make it a nice smooth transition. You can start at the very bottom to end and end at the top of this one if I want it to just go from one color to the next. All right, I just want it to happen through the word alpha. Yeah, it looks really nice. Okay, so that's the gradient tool. There's also linear gradients, radial gradients. So that would do circles, like let's start in the P here and draw out. All right, so that does like a circle. Now I can use this tool to draw masks, and I can use this tool to draw whatever I want. We're going to use it to draw an alpha channel, which is basically a mask. Okay, so because of that, I'm going to go ahead and turn these guys off. And I need to go back to this other picture of the landscape before I blurred it. Okay, so the filter we're going to use is called a Gaussian blur filter. So if we go under the blur filters and say Gaussian blur and turn that way up, we can see it blurs it out, which is what I want. It brings up this little dialog box over here that I can turn up or down to get more or less, whoa, look at that, more or less blur. It's kind of pretty. So I would say I want about 10 to 12, like I'm just looking at the trees, because again, I'm not going to blur the front, I'm just going to blur the trees. 10 to 12 pixels probably. We can make it really obvious. Let's make it really obvious and do like 20. This will make it super clear. So about 20 pixels looks like a super good blur back there. I'm going to cancel this because I don't want to apply this just yet, but Gaussian blur is what we need. But we need to protect this foreground area, right? Let's retitle this to mud too. Okay, so how do we protect that? Now, of course, you know, we could always take like a rectangular marquee tool, and you know, we could make a selection to blur just that selection. We could say blur, Gaussian blur, and we could blur that. Okay, but that's a really harsh line right there, right? So we'd say, well, let's go ahead and just, you know, take a lasso and add to that selection maybe with a huge feather. Like something like that, and then we'll just shift. And this will all work. Okay, I can add to that, and I can do Gaussian blur again. And this time it's slightly more feathered. Obviously, more feathering would be even better. If I would have put more feather on my lasso when I selected, I could have a nice blend there. But I'm going to show you the alpha channel way to do this, just because it'll make it super elegant, super smooth. The transition will be nice and subtle. I picked this image just for this because it has this nice, you know, foreground to background depth to it. So how's an alpha channel work? Well, it's just really us drawing up a mask. So just think of this. We need the bottom mask, so when we apply the Gaussian blur, it won't be affected with the blur. So that has to be masked out. And the top part would basically be our selection, our unmasked area. So if I can draw a gradient using black and white, which will be a mask, and then somehow turn that into a selection, and then apply my Gaussian blur, that would work out great. And I can do that with an alpha channel. So like I said, you've used alpha channels before. Like let's say I make a really horrible selection of this, cedar tree, except with like a 1 pixel feather. And I said, oh, let's save that selection. It's tree. Well, guess what? If I go to Window Channels, so this is my Channels window, I see my tree down there. And a really horrible selection of a tree. I hit Command D on my keyboard because I don't need that selection. And I could load this up as a selection if I wanted to, just by dragging it to this little marching ants icon here. I could see my RGB values. I could even turn that off and still load it up. I could still load the selection, just drag it real quick down to here without clicking on it. I clicked and dragged all in one motion, and that loaded it up. Also remember, if I wanted to load a selection, or now that I know these are alpha channels, it's a black and white channel, it's an alpha channel, all I have to do, I'm turning off the eyeball because I don't want the channel showing, is I can also go to my select menu and say load selection. And where it says selection, it's really an alpha channel. So I could pick my tree there as well. All right, so you all have done this before. Now we're just going to make our own alpha channel with the intention of using it later on. Instead of like using the selection and turning that into a channel for later use, we're just going to start by clicking this little plus button. So it has an alpha channel. It's called alpha 1. I'll call it alpha gradient. And I got black and white here, and I have my gradient tool, and I have it set to a linear gradient, and now I can just drag. Now I did that backwards because I wanted the black to be on the bottom, right? In fact, I can even turn on this RGB so I can see my mud. I just turned on the eyeball. I didn't click on this layer because I want to keep working here. So see how this has a gray bar around it? That's my selected layer. I'm just turning the eyeball on so I can see it visually. But depending on how slow I want this gradient, I would drag it, oops, I did it backwards again, up to down in this case, or I could just flip the colors and draw it however I wanted. It really depends on your foreground and background colors. I can flip them, and then I can drag from the bottom. So I want all this to be blurred starting at that road. So probably what I would do, I want all this to be sharp, so I'd probably draw something just about like that. And that looks like a nice smooth gradation. If you look here, you can see that nice gray in the center that goes from a dark gray to a light gray and then to a white eventually. That's the channel I want. So all I have to do now that it's there with my file, I can save my file so I have it for later, but I need to load that up. I called it alpha gradient. I could do this again. I could just drag it down to here, and it loads up my marching ants. Now here's the thing, the marching ants can't approximate that channel that we drew very well visually, but I know it's what I drew. Like I drew it, I saw it, I turned it on and I saw how it looked. So don't be freaked out by the fact that the marching ants don't look like they have any feathering or blending or gradient or anything. They do, because I just loaded that up. And also I could load it up if I forget that I can drag it to this little icon. I can always go to my select menu and say load selection and just pick it there. And now what I should always be doing is making sure I can see both my layers and channels. If you have the default thing set up, sometimes these are tabbed together. So you want to pull one of these tabs out maybe, or just I only have one layer, so there's not a big deal here. But if I had a bunch of layers, oftentimes students forget to actually pay attention to what layer they're on and apply the filter to an empty layer and nothing happens, or to something else unintentionally, which is no biggie. We have undo. All right, so let's apply the Gaussian blur now and see what happens. And I'm going to go back to, our last filter is up here, but I'm going to go back to our blur filter and Gaussian blur in case I want to change my settings. I don't want to use 50. I decided I'd use one somewhere around 20. I'm going to hide these marching ants with Command H so we can see what's happening better. But I've just hidden them. They're still there. I've just used Command H to hide them, so maybe 20 is a little extreme. That looks pretty good. About 14. All right, then when I have Quinn in here in the front, he'll look really nice because he'll be standing in the sharp mud. We blow this guy up so you can see this transition. So down at the bottom, the mud is nice and sharp. This actually is now a parking garage on campus. I took this when Quinn was like 3, and he liked to run around in his construction outfit. Bob the Builder. Can I say that? But see, nice and sharp, nice and fuzzy. Our alpha channel worked out great for that situation. Also works really well with type. If you need to, do something crazy with type, you could, like where you blur it out sequentially. But anytime you want to apply something with a nice kind of gradient, keep in mind you can always make a mask with the gradient tool and then load the mask in via the alpha channels as a channel. Alpha just means it's a black and white masking channel. So basically alpha channels in general refer to that idea. So yeah, I will post this video and you can watch it over and over again. Yay!